Welcome to Part 3 of the Paddling Tidewater course, presented by Paddle Trails Canoe Club. In this section, we'll talk about currents, or the horizontal movement of water. We'll look at what causes currents, what can affect them, and the difference between flood, ebb, and river currents. We'll also go over some tips for paddling safely in currents. Tides cause ocean water to rise and fall, and water always flows from high to low. That flow of water is called a current. So when the ocean level rises, the water flows into the Puget Sound and from there up into tidal estuaries and rivers. That's called a flood current. And when the ocean level falls, that water flows back out, which is called an ebb current. Rivers always have their own downstream flow. Where a river meets an incoming flood current, the two will push against each other in a dynamic balancing act. If the river flow is strong, like during spring snowmelt, it can stop the flood current and just keep going downstream. If the river flow is lower, often in summer and early fall, there's a balance point somewhere upriver. There, water can look like it's not moving much at all, with water pushing in from both directions. When the river flow is very low, like on the Snohomish River in late summer, the flood current can actually push water many miles upriver, up to 16 miles in some cases. When the tide comes in, it has to fight against the river flow, so flood currents tend to be slower. When the tide goes out, the river's current and the ebb tide add together, creating a stronger flow downstream. That's why ebb currents can feel stronger than flood currents, even if the tide rise and fall are the same. As a general rule, the larger the tide difference between low and high water, the faster the current will be. But the speed is not constant. It takes some time to build to its full velocity. The rule of thumb for calculating current speed is 0, 50, 90, 100. At slack tide, which is the brief period at high and low tide when the water is not rising or falling, there is zero current. During a 7-hour tide change, 1 hour after slack tide, the current will have reached about 50% of its maximum velocity. 2 hours after slack tide, it will be at about 90%, and between 3 and 4 hours after slack tide, it will be at 100%, before dropping back to 90% at the 5-hour mark, and then to 50% at 6 hours. Then it's back to slack tide and no current. Current speeds can also change because of the shape of the shoreline. Narrow spots, like under bridges and in gaps between islands, can make water speed up, while wider spots, like harbors and wide ocean expanses, can slow it down. This is an example of the principle of continuity, which states that for an incompressible fluid, like water, the amount of fluid flowing into a channel must equal the amount flowing out. So if the channel narrows, the fluid speeds up to keep the flow constant. You can see this in action at places like the Tacoma Narrows and Deception Pass, where water is squeezed through a narrow gap and speeds up noticeably. Obstructions to the water flow, like islands, downed trees, piers, and bends in the river, can cause small eddies or swirling areas of water to form on their downstream side. Eddy lines are the boundary between the main downstream current and the circular reversing flow of an eddy. They often appear as a visible line or seam on the water's surface. Eddy lines can be turbulent and tricky to cross because of the abrupt change in flow direction and speed on either side. Fast currents also tend to be concentrated in the deepest and widest parts of a channel, where the water encounters less friction, so can move more easily. There is a tremendous amount of information available for predicting current speeds and direction. There is too much to cover in this video, but here are some links to NOAA's current maps and stations. Keep in mind that most detailed current predictions from NOAA are intended for commercial vessels, so they tend to focus on the middle of shipping lanes, places you probably won't be paddling. Near shore, the current is usually slower and more likely to have eddies. Always paddle in a group so someone can help in an emergency. Paddle Trails requires at least 2 paddlers and 2 boats for our trips, and more is generally safer. Paddling on moving water is inherently more dangerous than paddling on still water. Hazards approach much faster, so stay focused. Most paddlers can paddle at about 3 knots. Take this into account when planning your route. Most tidal rivers around the Puget Sound won't exceed 2 knots unless there's been a lot of rain or high snowmelt, but even paddling against 2 knots will slow you down considerably and sap your strength. Keep an eye out for obstacles like pilings, logs, and swirling water patterns that show where currents shift. If you're in a tandem boat, your bow paddler can sound the alert as soon as they see an obstacle. Some obstacles are easy to see, sticking up out of the water. Others can be just under the surface, especially at higher water levels, making them a serious hazard. Don't assume deeper water is always safer. Practice back paddling to slow down quickly or stop to avoid a hazard or give yourself more time to plan. You can also use eddies to help paddle against the current. Look for small eddies along the shoreline caused by the friction of the current against an uneven shore. You can save a lot of energy by paddling through the eddies rather than the main opposing current. Practice ferrying across the current, moving sideways without drifting too far downstream. To do this, keep your boat headed upstream at an angle so your forward momentum cancels out the force of the current and your sideways momentum carries you across the channel. If you point your boat directly at the spot you're aiming for, the current will push you downstream, forcing you to constantly adjust your angle and giving you a longer path.
Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to watch the other sections of this course and check out www.paddletrails.org for more information.